Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Practical Microservices stream. I didn't do my lighting correctly. This will be a fun start to the process. And we're back. Let's see. Getting started a little late today because work ran a little bit late, but that is fine. And let me turn on the sweet tunes here. There we go. Sweet tunes going. We are ready to dive back into it. So, what is worth saying straight off? First of all, we have the meetup coming up. Not that one. Snapshotting. This is tomorrow evening for me. Might be early morning on the next day for some. But we'll be talking about snapshotting, what it is, how to do it in Eventide. And the context of it will be the work we did on the composite component and device video component here on the stream. So that should be interesting. And then also, I'm pretty excited about this. It is something I wanted to do for a... Oh, no, don't. Twitter, I don't want to be logged in. That's disappointing. Here, let me grab... Let's see if I grab that and then come up here. So, let's see. I wrote Practical Microservices, and I want to do a sequel, but I thought it would be interesting to work in public, do the sequel in public, but like from the get-go, the whole process from the book proposal with PragProg through everything. And so I asked them about it. They like the idea. They think it's pretty interesting and they're real anxious to see the results, which is awesome. But there is no like, yep, we're totally going to take your book. Like, I've got to write the proposal and make it compelling and stuff. So we're going to start that Tuesday of next week. So a week from yesterday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. That's funny. Mountain and my start at the same time, and I happen to live in the Mountain time zone, so I can say my standard time at 7 p.m. Next Tuesday we'll start. Probably stream for 2 to 3 hours on there, putting it together and just going through their book proposal template, filling it out. There will be things like an analysis of the market, like, does the market need this additional book? And I think it's worthwhile because I really like PragProg. They were really good to me, and that whole process has been very beneficial. But I really think that the more talking we do with one another, the more idea sharing that we do with one another, the more that our industry will advance. And so, obviously there's the selfish thing. It builds some buzz around my own project here, but a very real aspect of it is I had looked at writing with PragProg probably back in like 2013, and I saw their process and it kind of scared me at the time. But so I want to demystify the process. They're a great organization, and it doesn't have to be this difficult hurdle to get over. And so I'd like to lower the barrier, lower the barrier to entry for other folks who are interested in pursuing that avenue. So yeah, come see the stream on those days, and we will talk about what it takes to send a book proposal to PragProg and what to expect as best I can. I'm not actually internal there. I only have my own experience with the first one, but I think it'll be interesting to do that. And I just really like the idea of working in public too. So that's that. Let's jump back into where we were, which few changes that came out of the meetup last Thursday in the lower left. That is still what we're working on, so we'll leave that. And yeah, I'm doing this email thing. I want to get my list going. Did you know about this, dear watcher? Let me share this. If you were to go to practicalmicroservices.com, I have a mailing list that I have never once written to, but you could go there and sign up. I'm going to start writing to that soon and probably send something every day that is not to everybody's appetite. That's fine. My promise is to make them worthwhile. And if you were to sign up and start getting them, and then you said, you know what, Ethan, these aren't worthwhile, then you unsubscribe And that's fine, because I wouldn't want you to keep receiving emails from me if you didn't want to read them. That puts the work on me to make them worth receiving. So, also want to mention, let's see. So if we go to YouTube, Practical Microservices Stream VODs, this probably isn't there yet in Google anyway. So if we go to youtube.com and if we search for Practical Microservices Stream VODs, does that show up? Want to find a channel? Oh, fine. Whatever. I'll find it somewhere. I'm making a YouTube channel to back up all the recordings of the streams here, and I will actually get that functioning and bring it up another day. So let's see, where were we? I'm taking notes on what we did each day so that when you look at the Twitch VODs, this was some feedback I got from a coworker. With every single stream is just titled porting video tutorials to Eventide, and there is no other description. It makes it really hard to know what was covered. And so I'm taking notes after each stream now, what we covered and stuff, and going to give each stream a title after the fact. I don't know exactly what it will be until after the stream, but that's kind of the workflow we're going with there. Whew. All that said, let's get into our actual project then. We tested, we wrote a test for the transform stuff, and what? Right, I'm on this screen because for work I needed to look at something in this component. We're dealing with aggregation, and so I had the question of how did that query class work and wanted to show that to someone. But our test here is that the source URIs get set, because that being a collection array, the serialization of that just comes from a 2H. Why do I say all of this instead of showing it? When we do the raw data transform, we use the 2H on the instance, which leverages the 2H implemented by schema data structure. And that 2H doesn't know how to properly deal with a collection array like the source URIs. And I'm going to say properly in the sense of serializing something that we can usefully deserialize later. It could be useful with frustrating yourself. It would be very good at that when you're using a collection array. But anyway, I try to be funny sometimes and it doesn't always work out. So what we want to do is now continue with, are there tests that we would want to write for this direction? And I think there is one. So the reason we're only testing this line right here is because that 2H method that's in schema data structure is already tested by Eventide. And if we're just conforming to what it does anyway, there is no need for us to write another test for that, I don't think. If the test failure that we saw, or not test failure, but when we ran the component and saw the weirdness with retrieved minutes and all of that, tests that tested those other attributes wouldn't have caught that. So what I want is the test that would have failed given the change that we made to how the composite class is implemented. So we're going to come back to test automated composite transform is where we're working. Make a copy of raw data here. And now we're going to test that instance method. And this is the test that I think we should have had. Composite transform instance is what we want. So now we're in that file. We'll change this to instance. Right, that was the question that I had. That's why I took notes on this and then I didn't read them. So how would we get the raw data example to pass into the method? Should we make a control about that? Tune in next to find out, or I guess tomorrow to find out, but now it is tomorrow, so we're going to find out. We would not start with an instance because that's what we're producing here. How would we want to store the raw data? Is that something worth writing a control for? Yes, because the whole idea is the tests shouldn't be responsible for coming up with the raw data. We want to keep things that change together, and controls are written as we're implementing something. And if the interface of something changes, then the controls also change. And so, yeah, we will write a control for that. And what we would have done, had we had this in place from the get-go, when we made the change to how the composite is structured, we would have then been like, oh, we need to update all of the controls associated with this as well. And then that would have broken the test and that would have signaled what we got there. If we hadn't run the test locally, which, not the test, if we hadn't spun up the component locally, and I think that is a really critical part of the workflow to put in there, that would have made it to our deployed scenario without an error. So, like, yes, I'm embarrassed that it happened, but the normal workflow caught it before it would have made it to customers. And so it's not like an alarm, oh, the process broke down. It is a little bit. It suggested to me that because we were stepping outside of the normal flow of what the transform protocol expects, then we need to put tests in place for the things that step outside of that. Stop talking, Ethan, and just get in here and do what you're doing. So what I want to do is make a folder in here called Composite. And in there, we'll put a file called transform. So this is in our controls file here. And actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, right. So inside of Composite, we have various modules in there. But those modules represent different scenarios, different states for the composite control. And so this transform thing, yes, is a submodule of the actual composite class, but I don't think of a control for it as being the same thing as a control for composite instances. So that's why I'm going with this way of writing it out, to kind of let the controls associated with the transform data live as a separate thing. So let's pull the need for it into existence, shall we? So what we would have is our raw data would come from controls composite transform dot raw data. And I kind of like the name for that. I think that's a fine way to do it. And then we would grab, nope, stop right there. Because we have a failure at that. Keep hitting J right there when I'm going to comment out line of things. Maybe there's a better way to do that in Vim than what I know, but here we are. So let's see. That won't run because that composite transform doesn't exist. And that is also the wrong test. So let's grab our instance one. Name error on transform. That's what we expected. So now we go make the file. That's when we would have done it in the flow. And then we come to the controls loader and find where we have composite. And I'll just put it there, like so. Now we should still have the name error because we haven't actually filled that out yet. Let's do that. We are in. Here comes our module stack, the composite component. Within there, we are in controls, composite, module, transform. And let's just stop there real quick. The way that I have this written is transform.raw data. So that would suggest to me we would have a raw data module, and we could even spell that correctly with a self.example. Could do composite directory transform directory raw data. But I don't think that would grow enough to warrant the additional file. So we'll just go like that and like that. Now we should pass. Didn't. Why did we not? Did I spell something wrong? Raw data Oh, raw module. Raw data. There we go. Typo. Okay, good. We're running. So now what we would do is our instance would be equal to composite transform dot instance passing in the raw data. I expect this to fail because our raw data doesn't have anything in it. Indeed, raw data source URIs. It's nil, so we're trying to index into nil, and that doesn't work. So let us come back here. We need to make an example of what the raw data of one of these looks like. And that would, what would that be? That would just come back to us as a hash. So we could just drop that in there right now. And I think that will get the test running again. Yes, we did. Oh, awesome. Is this the Ethan Garofalo, the author? One and the same. Welcome, glorious legions of fans. How are you doing, man? Good to see you. I think the book has sold like upwards of tens of copies. No, it's done better than that, but anyway, good. Awesome. Yeah, so let's see. We are in the middle of, at the meetup, we found out that the way that I had written the entities using attributes that weren't attributes. Let me just put that on screen here. Actually, this is the class right here. So when you have, you don't have to build your entity classes this way, but if you build them as schema data structures, you get access to this attribute macro here where you can put a property name and the type it's supposed to be. The world famous. Hey, Peyton Rules. Welcome to the chat for the very first time. Good to see you here. Sorry, I had completely lost my train of thought in responding to that. That's all right, though. Not your fault. That's on me. I haven't seen you here in the chat before, so what brings you here, I guess? I'll give you a chance to type and continue with what we were showing here. But basically, so, saw your tweets about doing a live prog proposal. Awesome, yeah. So gonna start that Tuesday of next week. Don't let that discourage you from being here now, but I'm pretty excited for that project. It's been swirling in my mind for a while, and finally, two things happened. One, worked up the courage to ask the folks at Prog, is that okay? Do you have any issue with that? And they're like, no, that sounds awesome. And then the other was like another 2 months of working up the gumption to actually publicize that and commit to doing it. So I think it's going to be fun, and you can expect all the same kind of routine blunders that I do here in the stream. But yeah, I'm excited for that. So next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time is when we'll start that. And I realize that's Thanksgiving week, but it's still a couple days before most people take break, and maybe not everyone coming lives in the US. So anyway, back to what we were saying here. So we have these entity classes, and we can put these attributes on them and give them a type. And the way that I had coded this up for our meetup last month was that like this retrieved minutes that's now a hash wasn't one of these attributes. And so when trying to get snapshotting working, I don't know everybody's familiarity with all the pieces of autonomous components here. So as I use vocabulary, I am going to assume that not everybody knows what every piece of that is. So if you're like, oh, we get this, yawn, go ahead and say that in the chat and I'll speed up. So we're doing event sourced autonomous microservices. And so we represent state as events. If you've read Practical Microservices, we get into that. But when you are responding to something, you need to know the current state of an object to make a decision. So for example, suppose you are stitching together composite videos from various clips that you have to retrieve. And let me bring up our event diagram here. this, I'm just going to zoom out because the particulars of this aren't necessarily that important for what we're doing right this second. But what it shows is we have this major horizontal line here is a division between two different components. This is a notation that is loosely to heavily inspired by event modeling, which you can read about at eventmodeling.org. Few minor differences, but like this stream right here represents the events that we put in this composite video generators streams. And when some stimulus like this build command comes in, we need to be able to say, have we already done what we're supposed to do in response to that command? So build comes in, we write an initiated event to there, but we don't want to write two initiateds, and we will see duplicate messages. We will restart the component, so they'll recycle the build, et cetera, et cetera. And so the way we do that is a process called projection, where we take all of the events in the stream that we're interested in projecting, and we reduce over them, left fold over them, to arrive at this is the current state of the object. Now, one of the questions that comes up from that is like, well, suppose the stream had 1,000 events or 1,000,000 events in it. That could be a costly operation. We just project it and throw all that processing away. By default, yes. And in practice, it ends up not being that much of an issue. And that's actually what we're going to talk about at the next meetup. We run a Utah Microservices meetup, and the next session is actually tomorrow evening at 6:30 p.m. So if you're interested in that, check that out. And in fact, like in the right next to the frame of where I am on the screen right now, there are those bang commands there. You can type those in and get some useful information about what we're doing. So like I can type meetup, and Nightbot, the ever faithful bot, will come in and help us with that. So anyway, we'll talk about snapshotting in more detail during the meetup. But yes, so we project, we pitch, but there is a technique called snapshotting, which says, okay, so we've got, let's legit say we had 1,000,000 events in a stream, and we had projected up through the first 500,000 of those. There's a couple of rules about our events that give us an opportunity to do a caching mechanism of sorts. We never change the event. That is a hard, fast rule of event sourcing, except in extremely rare cases where it isn't. But let's say for all intents and purposes, we do never change the events. And we never delete them. That means that if we projected the first 500,000 for a particular stream, we could save the result of that, persist that somewhere durable. And then when we go to project the next 500,000, instead of starting at the very beginning, we start with the result at 500,000 events and just continue to apply the next ones after that. In fact, if we did start over, that's exactly what we would be doing anyway, because we would have to compute up to the 500,000th one before we apply the others. That's what snapshotting is. In the Eventide framework, if you want to have persistent snapshotting, it provides it, but you have to implement this transform protocol called, and I'll scroll down in this file, where we have this module transform right here. And you have to supply two instances, one called raw data, which is given the instance of your entity, your projection result. Tell me how to shove that into the database. And so that's what this method is. And then the other method is, given some of that raw data from the database, tell me how to get back to an instance of the thing that we're serializing. So they are serialization, deserialization methods. For the serialization piece of it, if we have included schema data structure at the top of our class as we did, let me go back up there real quick. If we have included this, then we can just make use of this toH method on the instance to get the raw data. However, that will only get things that were previously declared as an attribute. So over the past week or so, we've been making this code more able to be snapshotted than how it was before. and we got it all working, except then I turned it on and then the component crashed because we made another change as well on how to represent certain things, and it led to a crashing situation, but it was local, so not worried about it. Had that exact flow been followed at a job, for example, we would have caught it before it went live. So I'm not too broken up about it. So where we were was because starting the component and seeing a crash wasn't caught by an automated test, we are adding the automated test that would have caught that. And so we have one in place for the serialization portion of it. And we are just now working on a test for the deserialization one. And normally, I like to write the tests before we write the code. In this case, I didn't because I didn't think it was necessary. And we got the result of not thinking that was necessary. So for like Peyton and anyone else who's new, there are some conventions here that are going to probably feel very new to you. And we'll just talk through them because that's what we do here on the stream. So we are writing this test. So this is all Ruby based. That's what Eventide is. Practical Microservices was JavaScript based. And like I'm in this larger project of porting all of the book code to Ruby just for fun. And so there are some conventions in Eventide that I think are very helpful. One is this notion of controls. And these don't mean like UI controls. Awesome. Love Ruby. Sadly, that is not said as much these days as it used to be, but I think it's a lovely and viable language. Peyton, what's your experience with Ruby? Have you used it professionally, done some Rails development maybe? And one never knows, like, what is the delay with chat on Twitch? So I'll keep going, and then when you have something, I'll stop again. Okay, so yeah, controls are not UI controls. It's control in like the scientific experiment sense of the word. And what it is like when you're writing a test, you need test data to operate on. Branched out since. That makes sense. It's good to learn different languages. Like, I don't know. When I was new into programming, it scared me to learn one. And then once I had one, I was like, oh my gosh, I could never do that again. But I don't know. Good to see different ideas. What kind of things do you do now? Like for me, when I stopped using Ruby full time, I started doing Node. Now I'm sort of backish to doing Ruby full time. What other kind of things have you done? And then right on, C++ and by night Rust. SB Ditto, who I'm not sure if you're still in the chat, SB Ditto, but you're also into Rust quite a bit. And well, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. C++ is fun. That was okay. First language I learned was BW Basic, but then in college they taught us C++. Taught us, I mean, professional grade. I don't know that I came out of that knowing it at that level, but anyway, that's cool. Rust intrigues me a lot. I'm still in like for the past 8 years been in the honeymoon status with Haskell, where I've done some toy problems and really enjoyed it. But then experiencing Rust, I was like, oh wow, this has a lot of the things that I like from Haskell, but in maybe a more palatable language. Yeah, so SB Ditto, that's the thing I wasn't sure if I would reveal if you wanted to talk about that, but has worked on an Eventide port for Rust, but the day job gets in the way. It always does. It has its perks, like paying the bills and stuff, but anyway, okay, so controls. We need data to do tests. We need something to run through the functions that we're testing. And this controls methodology is... I hate that word. Sorry I said it. But this pattern, if you will, is we're saying that instead of the test being responsible for coming up with test data, we make that a thing of development. So over here on the right is where I'm actually filling out what this control will be. And the reason we would do that is we want to keep things that change together. And examples of what our constructs are change with the construct itself, but the test doesn't necessarily. And so when you see control, it's kind of like fixtures in the Rails world, but that is a really drawn out kind of. I think they're after some of the same ends, but very different in spirit and how they're actually done. Oh, SPTato, you're also currently distracted with a possible Haskell port for another side project. I would love to see that. I know there have been some folks in the Eventide community who did some bits of a Haskell port, but so far well, I guess their Haskell port is far enough along that they shipped a production project with it, which is great. There's also a JavaScript port-ish. Ish is not the right word. Let me pull it up real quick and put it in the chat. It's called Gearshaft, and it works. It shipped production stuff. I said the ish because the guy who created it, Mario, he's a cool guy, is not happy with the current lack of documentation, but that's a node port of Eventide. Anyway, okay, so controls, yeah. So we're saying we're just making examples of what the constructs of our code look like. And then we can use those in the tests. If there are like components that use our component, they can use those constructs as well. And so we're writing a test to make sure that given raw data, we're able to produce an instance of our entity class. And normally we would just use everything built in with Eventide to cover that. But we use a particular data type that is not correctly picked up by that built-in 2H. So that's the bit that we're testing right now. And that's these collection arrays here, which give us type checking on an array. Like, here's an array, it should only have strings as the kind of thing. Well, that's how we're using it. You could put other things in there. But the Haskell project is more of a MessageDB driver, not Eventide port, at least from what I remember. That tracks. Yeah. A full-blown Eventide in Haskell could potentially leverage that driver as you describe it there. So yeah, good stuff. All right, so the raw data will come back to us as a hash. That's what we'll receive here. And so we need an example of what that would look like. And I don't fully remember. So we'll just come to the attribute list. So we would have an ID member in here. And where could we get an example of one of those? Well, we have an ID control, which is right here. Let me open that real quick. So lib composite component controls ID. And that's just a rename spacing there. So in these controls that you'll find all throughout Eventide code, there is the convention that we have an example module method on them. And so the identifier UUID controls incrementing is no exception to that. So we can just do id.example to get one of those. We need a device ID on here, device ID, and I believe I have a control that gets that as well at this point of this component's development. The composite component controls, I think that's on the composite one. Am I mistaken there? No, okay, there it is. Which also just maps to id.example because that'll just give us an example UID is what we're using for those. But so we can do composite dot device ID. So that one doesn't say example because that control is a property of the composite. So that's the difference there. We need a start minute for this, and that would be again composite.start minute. We need an end minute. Oh boy. Having trouble operating Vim. And an initiated, we could just say false for that. That tracks whether or not we've seen one of those initiated events in the stream. A URI. Did I put in a URI control? It looks like I did. That's great. So we can just grab an example of that. And built is a property we would have. We can say that's false. And then source URIs, this is the one that we're actually concerned about here. Serialized, this would be an array of URIs. So we could say URI dot example there. It's not any particular URI so that those have the same value. For our purposes, that'll work. And then retrieved minutes would be on here as well. And that's just the hash, so I'm gonna make it a hash, and it can be empty because hashes can be empty, and that's just fine. So let's close this control file over here, and our test should run again because all we did was now give some values to there. And now I hit this binding.irb, so let me find that real quick. Get rid of you. Oh, we didn't pass, right, because we haven't changed the code yet. Duh. Collection can't be empty is what we got there. And raw data.source URIs. Okay, so that one's puzzling to me. Why is that coming back? Why does it think that is empty? Let's go ahead and put that binding.irb back in there. When we call the example here, we are returning this hash, and so we should have it available for our call to the instance there. So let's see if that assumption is correct. So we can look at the raw data. Sure enough, we got that. Did I spell source URIs wrong or something? Raw data source URIs. No, that has something there. Maybe it wasn't that line. Wait, no, hang on a sec. Which line actually crashed there? Composite 90. Oh, right. It's the retrieved minutes. Sorry, that was silly. There was actually nothing wrong. This is how this code was written before we made a change to storing these retrieved minutes as a hash rather than an array for reasons past. So we would want to get rid of that line right there. And I really like to see test failures before we say all is well. So what I'm going to do is comment this line out, because we are going back and doing something that ought to have been done sooner. So let's try to mimic how that actually would have flowed there. But with our source URIs here, we want to assert that, and I copy pasted this from a different test. So our instance dot source URIs dot content is the method we're after, because I'm coming again back to the composite class here, going to the very top, and then source URIs is this collection array, and it has a content method which returns a raw array to us. So what we want to make sure is that that content is equal to the raw data at source URIs is what we're after there. Right, so why did that crash? That's strange. What did we get? Type array cannot be assigned. Hang on a second. Oh, right, yeah, duh. Because I commented out. This is the failure we wanted to see. So now so we were trying to assign a Ruby array to an attribute that was expecting a collection array, and those are different classes. So that is the library doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and me forgetting that we had commented that line out. So I think this will work. Failed the assertion. This is what I was afraid of. And I think it failed it because these are not literally the same object. I think their contents are the same, so we may need a different assertion here. So we can test that out real quick by doing a binding.irb right there. And now that we're there, we can say, hey, instance.source URIs.content, what are you? You have that one URL in you, and then raw data at source URIs, what are you? Raw data at source URIs is a collection array. That's strange to me. Why would that be that? Did we do some other transformation in there that caused that? Oh, maybe it's by the time we get to this point, something has changed. Because maybe calling this build did some sort of a transformation there. Oh no, duh, because I set it to 1 right there. Yeah, so we need a clone of that or something, I think. What I'm not sure about in Ruby is if you do equality on 2 arrays, does it like make sure it's literally the same object, or does it actually compare the values? So let's find out. So to do that, let's get expected source URIs and set that equal to raw data at source URIs. I think we can do this in Ruby. I think there is a clone method. Let's test that real quick. Get our test to fail. And then can we just call clone on that? We can. Great. That is the method. So we want to clone that. It's a single dimensional array of strings and compares values from your memory. Okay, cool. Thanks, SB Ditto. If that's what it is, then that'll be good. And this will make sense. Expected source URIs. You know what? I don't need the expected on there. That's superfluous, I think. So we can just come here and go like that. Remove the binding and see if this passes. Woohoo! All right. I think your memory is correct. Because those are very much different arrays now. They're different objects that have the same content, same length, same values, and all of that. So that's successful there. That big crash we had that was on the other line that was still dealing with the retrieved minutes one, that was the crash that I would have wanted the automated test to find. So I think what that means is the component will run correctly now. So let's do that. Some more introduction to stuff. So we're doing event source autonomous microservices, and for that we have what's called a message store, and I will spin that up here real quick. Let me show that Docker Compose file. I think that might be interesting. So we have an image for MessageDB. What is MessageDB, you ask? Well, let me pull that up for you. MessageDB it grew out of the Eventide project, and it is essentially some schema installed into Postgres. And by schema, I don't mean the Postgres construct that is called a schema, but it's a table, and if you type definitions and some stored functions that will make Postgres operate as a message store. So you're able to write messages, you're able to read them. You can do various filterings that make sense in the context of a message store. And a message store then it's a database optimized for storing messages. I do not think of things like Kafka as message stores. They are message brokers and they're very good at what they do. But what sets a message store apart is that it's first and foremost a database, and it has some features that we need for it to function as a message store, like optimistic concurrency. When I write a message, I write it to a stream. I would like to know that the stream is at version X, because otherwise all of my assumptions are invalid. Kafka doesn't do that. They've said they never will, and nor should they, because they're not a message store. Then that's something that a message store needs. And then the other is, well, let me run the component real quick, and I think that'll make the point clearer that I was about to make. So I started this Docker compose here, and that is now going to pull down that image and run it. So using just whatever database viewing tools I have, in this case I use Table Plus, which I love, except for the fact I can't make the text bigger with the standard Command Plus that you do on a Mac. And so I just really hope this text is readable. I mean, I think it's obvious that there's nothing in this message store right now, but so we have a messages table and it has various columns on it. And I'm going to run a script over here on the right that is going to inject a build command. Why is it build? Because that's what my design led to, having a command called build, which is saying, make this composite video between these two timestamps, is how it works. So I will run that. And if we go back to the message store, we can reload it and see, sure enough, there we have a build command in there. Now I will start this component. And I want to start both components, actually. There are two involved in this. The one we were looking at is the one that controls the overall flow of stitching together all of the individual clips into a final composite component. And this component, this is all done in the context of pretending that you have a fleet of IoT devices that are cellularly connected, and some of them can record video clips. And so you want to provide functionality to say, hey, from device X, I would like to get a single video that represents everything you saw from 9:05 to 9:07, kind of a thing. And the devices are storing those clips in 1 minute chunks. So the device video component is the one that actually goes and gets them from the device. There are no actual IoT devices in what we're running here. It's simulated. And then the one we're about to start is the one that controls the stitching together of all of those things. So we go ahead and start that. And if we come to the message store, we should start to see some activity here. I think I left in a rogue exit statement that is useful for testing, but not so useful for actually running things. I did, look at that. Glad we caught that. So here's a bunch of, oops, that was the wrong one there. Let me grab Table Plus. Your bar is right there, and I want to make you bigger. We have a bunch of activity here. So this was that initial build command. The composite component handles that by writing an initiated event. And then it sends retrieve commands to this device video component. Now, the kind of overarching change, one of the overarching changes we've also been making is we want to make a record that we've sent that command so that we don't get a bunch of duplicate commands sent. But the real power of what we're looking at is, come on down, these recorded events. And these are the actual snapshots themselves. The way that you enable that, we talked a little bit about how it's enabled. In Eventide, there is this notion of the entity store. Realize this is the fire hose for everyone who is experiencing Eventide for the first time. Apologies for that. So the entity store is the thing that in our handler, which was what we have over here on the right, you'll notice like line 57, store.fetch. That's where the event sourcing is happening, where we run the projection and we say, hey, the thing with this ID, I need that projected, I need its current value. And it is this class that handles that. And we include functionality from Eventide here. That's what entity store comes from, the Eventide framework. And that gives us access to a few macros. And there's just a few things we need to tell an entity store to be able to do its job. One is, what stream category are the events that you care about found in? What's a stream category? Well, if we come back to the message store and we look at these stream names, you'll see they have some text and then a dash. And everything to the left of the very first dash, that's the category that the stream is in. This is a command stream, so we never projected those. But this event, for example, is not a command stream. And so this one can be projected. And so the category there is composite. And so going back to the entity store, what we're saying is you find your events within the composite category. When you're running a projection, here's the class that you're going to be projecting. So make an instance of these, and this is what I expect to get back. The projection class then, and we can see that right here in projection, just real quick, is how do we apply the various events that we'll see. So like we saw in the diagram, we have initiated events. Well, here's what it means to apply an initiated event to one of these composites. There's a few attributes we need to copy over, and then we set initiated to true on that composite. And then we need to tell it, how do you actually then read from where these events are? And message store Postgres read is part of Eventide, and it reads from message DB. So if you were using event store, in theory, you could have like a message store event store. That bit is in disrepair right now in Eventide because it wasn't used a lot. And then the other piece to enabling snapshotting is we add the snapshot. Here's the mechanism by which you do the snapshot. Again, that came from Eventide. And this interval is how many messages you want to go between before you do the snapshot. This is an absurd number of them to put. You wouldn't do a snapshot after 2 messages. Maybe I shouldn't say never. I wouldn't. It would be a real extreme circumstance. The projection would have to be so costly per message. So I put that on there so that I could trigger the snapshotting here. And that's what these recorded messages are. So it projected, did 2 messages, and then wrote this. And what you see in there is there's a time member in this message. So the snapshots themselves are actually stored in the message store in a composite snapshot stream. So it is, you store them right in the message store by default. If in your entity store, you supplied something else right here, like you don't have to store them in Postgres, just tell the entity store how to store them. You could store them in Redis, you could store them in a flat file, whatever you want. But by default, it ships with the ability to store them in the message store. And so there is an entity data member on there that then contains our output from that raw data function. And so then when we retrieve this, it's going to take that blob that I have highlighted there and hand that back to us at our, I have since closed the class composite component composite. It'll call us at instance and pass us that raw data. And so that's the protocol that we implemented there. We had to do one little deviation from just the kind of standard stuff to account for that typed array. I'm going to restart this now that I don't have that exit in there. And I want to pay real close attention. We have 23 messages in there so far. I expect at this point to not see duplicate retrieve messages. These retrieveds are different and such. So let's go ahead and rerun this. Now, as part of that, it would be deserializing those snapshots that it wrote. And what we see is the output from FFmpeg, because I do actually generate a composite video using some clips I stored in the repository. But no errors. FFmpeg is chatty, apparently. And if we come back here, I'm going to reload this now. And the 24th message is disappointing me. Why did you send your... Oh, wait, no, sorry. No, right. You're not supposed to be there. Oh, that's so anticlimactic. What happened? Wait a second. Why is that still storing? Oh, no. Retrieved. Did I? All right. Well, that... I've got it. I'm disappointed by that. That was not supposed to happen that way. So retrieved sent, if it's that or that. That's a real bummer. Let me restart the component again real quick. Oh, now it failed. Oh my goodness. This is terrible. This is why we run it, of course, before checking it in. We're getting wrong expected versions here because it's trying to write things it shouldn't be writing, I think. Oh man, new people showing up, and this is how it all ends today. I've got to get back to my day job. I only stream until about 1 p.m. my time and 3 minutes past there. So what I'm going to do is just take notes and we'll debug this next time. But that's sad. In some ways, I don't consider it necessarily a legit run because of a weird thing that happened with the exit, but I don't think I'm not going to blame that. I have something wrong in the code, and the item potence check is wrong. So when it recycles these messages, what a component does, it springs to life. It fetches a batch of messages to handle, processes through them, and then every so often records, hey, I processed through event, whatever. So we just expect to see the same message several times. And so we have to put in our code item potence mechanisms to be able to tell, hey, we've already done the work of processing this message. And something is wrong with my logic for that, which is disappointing because I thought the test covered it, but clearly not. And so we will address that tomorrow. And yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. I've been posting these. No, that's what I said earlier. Never mind. Skip that part. Have a wonderful day. Happy coding. And we will continue this tomorrow.